Good evening, and welcome to A Current Affair. I'm Emily Ward, and as we face a current Port of Brisbane industrial dispute, we are taking a look back at one of Australia's worst industrial disagreements involving our very own Qantas. The Australian-owned international airline Qantas has been the leading airline for Australia since the liquidation of Ansett Airlines in 2002. In late 2010, enterprise bargaining negotiations began with the unions of the engineers, catering and baggage staff and long-haul pilots. Employees were lobbying for better pay, working conditions and job security in response to the speculation that Qantas, as an Australian-based company, was going to outsource to offshore employees due to their annual wage being less than the employees in Australia. On the 16th of August 2011, Mr. Joyce announced that Qantas would invest in a new airline in Asia and enforce approximately 1,000 job redundancies. This resulted in industrial action that was lawful under the Industrial Relations Act 1999 and the Fair Work Act 2009. Three unions represented the industrial action. These unions were the Transport Workers Unions, Australian and International Pilots Association, and Australian Licensed Aircraft Engineers Association. These three unions dictated the industrial action, which Qantas addressed as extreme demands that have made it impossible for agreements to be reached. The dispute erupted to Australian historical levels when the union's demands resulted in Alan Joyce grounding their entire fleet of 108 planes and locking out the employees of Qantas on the 29th of October 2011. The drastic actions of Qantas caused controversy with the federal government. Transport Minister Anthony Albanese expressed his frustration towards the company and his concern for the future of Qantas. According to ABC News, Mr. Albanese stated, "I would hope the parties of this dispute act like adults." The grounding of all planes caused a huge ruckus in the public and a massive economic impact for Australia. This triggered the government to intervene and make an application to Fair Work Australia, which is the Australian Industrial Relations Tribunal created by the Fair Work Act 2009. Fair Work Australia intervened and mediated the case between the Qantas management team, the unions and the employees of Qantas. One of the larger issues that the unions wanted to rectify was an increase of their annual payments. Each union had a different issue in regards to payment. Qantas, however, rejected the concerns and complaints as the company would have to raise airfares to pay for increased wages, and this would risk further termination of jobs. Qantas Airlines says the issue began when the ALAEA union demanded a 26% pay rise annually, while TWA and AIPA demanded a 3 to 5% increase in payments annually over a 2-year period. Due to unjust and unreachable demands from the unions and the industrial action taken, Mr. Joyce was forced to lock out his employees and ground the entire fleet, cancelling 447 flights, ultimately affecting 68,000 passengers worldwide. The unions claim that their demands were originally arranged within the certified agreement, however, never enacted. Qantas stated that the cost of the industrial action was $194 million and accompanied by a $54 million loss due to clientele reduction. Also, the grounding of all aircrafts over the period of 3 days lost a total of $17 million as flights had to be refunded. This severely damaged the reputation, loyalty and stability of the company, thus discouraging crucial present and future stockholders. Other factors affecting the economy of the company was the high price of oil and the Australian dollar on par with the dollar of the United States of America. This made it hard for Qantas to compete with other airlines, given the extra cost Qantas had to face at the time. The global financial crisis was when a loss of confidence of US investors was had in the value of subprime mortgages and it caused a liquidity crisis. This also had an effect on the economy of Qantas as there were limited amounts of flexibility in regards to money making. The damage sustained to Qantas' reputation as an iconic Australian organisation discouraged tourism. The inconveniences faced by travellers during the lockout prompted doubts about the reliability of the airline and therefore the Australian tourism industry. Even though these economic factors were detrimental, there were no job losses recorded. Dr. Graham Smith and Leah Howard attempted to instigate legislation changes to make it easier for an affected party to apply for suspension or a cooling off period. This is believed to help circumvent another lockout scenario and ultimately benefit all parties that are associated with Qantas. Due to the large dependence on the function of Qantas, 3 days after the lockout and the grounding of all domestic and international flights, Fair Work Australia intervened by terminating the industrial action resulting in Qantas flying again. This termination was facilitated by FWA arbitration if the parties involved could not come to an agreement within a 21-day period of negotiation. This intervention was enacted at the conclusion of the negotiation period as none of the disputes had settled. The Senior Deputy President of Fair Work Australia, Les Kaufman, had to form the agreements for both parties. Fair Work Australia granted the unions a pay rise of 2.5%, which was lower than the requested pay rise of 26%. The parties did not come to an agreement in the changes to a job security clause under the current Enterprise Bargaining Agreement, ABA 8. Fair Work terminated all industrial action after this point. Under Division 6 Industrial Relations Protocol Section 1743B, it states that a lockout by an employee is lawful only if the employer has genuinely tried to reach agreement before the lockout starts. The unions announced their issues in March of 2011 and the lockout protocol was enacted in October of the same year. This allowed ample time for negotiation, thus the industrial action that occurred was lawful from both parties' perspectives. Both Fair Work Act 2009 Section 413 and the Industrial Relations Act 1999, Section 174, state the legislation of protected industrial actions. Both these acts support the initiating of the industrial agreement, from the unions initiating the action to the response from the Qantas management team. As these sections applies to industrial action that has been well organised and engaged fairly by a protected person or employer for the purpose of supporting claims made, and the response to the industrial action by the employer. Both acts support the rest of the conduct by both parties. There was one breach of the legislation, however. This occurred when the pilots started making unlawful announcements informing the passengers about the unions campaigning mid-flight. This is unlawful as there is no legislation to protect this act. Due to most of the industrial action that occurred being lawful, this benefited both parties as the specific laws are put into action to prevent as much damage to the company as possible. It is recommended to prevent industrial action in large companies that mediation, employer/employee input and communication is maintained. Mediation of all companies' employee rights and privileges are always considered, and they are actually considered in the workplace. Also recommended is staff surveying to ensure all staff are happy and consider themselves fairly treated and have confidence in their company's morals and values. Regular staff meetings should also be practiced, as this will ensure consistent action to maintain the employee's rights and happiness. This goes in hand with keeping communications open, as communication allows for all parties to know what is happening and how it should be carried out. This communication also extends to the unions, which should be constantly informed about the company's economic choices, particularly in relation to employees' pays and benefits. If unions are given reason as to these factors, for example, a rise in oil prices and the dollar dropping, then this will result in less lockouts and strikes that come with misunderstandings. These factors all contribute to the prevention of industrial action in powerful companies. The Australian icon Qantas suffered serious impacts in regards to reputation and the loyalty of their employees. The industrial action that took place was based on wages and poor working conditions and resulted in drastic economic issues and a decrease in reputation. However, due to the cooperation of Fair Work Australia, the industrial action was terminated with a finalised agreement between the two parties. The industrial relations dispute within Qantas is the most significant dispute in Australia's history, but we are happy to see the company stable and flying high. Thank you. I am Emily Ward, and this is A Current Affair. Good night.